The blaring sirens of police cars echoed across my farm, their flashing red and blue lights casting eerie shadows over my fields. I stepped out of my barn, hands still covered in soil, blinking in confusion. What the hell was going on? That's when I saw her, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, standing smugly with her arms crossed, a satisfied smirk plastered on her face. She pointed dramatically in my direction, yelling at the officers as if she had just uncovered the crime of the century. Oh, this was going to be good. It had been building up for weeks, ever since I moved to this property. Karen had made it her personal mission to make my life a living hell. She wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind that believed she owned the entire town. While my farm wasn't even inside the HOA's jurisdiction, that didn't stop her from trying to control it. At first, it was just the typical passive-aggressive nonsense. Notes on my gate about unsightly farming equipment, complaints about my tractor ruining the view, and the ever-so-classic line about how I was lowering the property values. I ignored it, figuring she'd get bored eventually. But Karen wasn't the type to give up. Then she started sending official-looking violation notices, HOA rules, fines, demands to cease all disruptive agricultural activities. I laughed them off. My farm was legally zoned. I had all the necessary permits, and I wasn't about to take legal advice from someone whose biggest accomplishment was regulating the height of neighborhood hedges. But Karen escalated. She started snooping around, taking pictures of my irrigation system and well. At first, I thought she was just looking for something to complain about, but when I caught one of her little minions trying to peek at my water supply, alarm bells went off. I asked them what the hell they were doing, and they just muttered something about community safety before scurrying away. That's when I knew Karen was up to something. And here we were. The officers stepped onto my land, looking around like they expected to find some sort of illegal operation. Karen strutted forward, practically vibrating with excitement. "I told you," she said, her voice dripping with self-importance. "He's running an illegal well. He's stealing our water supply. This entire operation is a health hazard." One of the officers, a guy with a thick mustache and tired eyes, sighed. "Sir, we received a report about a possible illegal water system on this property. We need to conduct an inspection." I crossed my arms, barely holding back a grin. "And who exactly reported this?" Karen puffed up like a peacock. "As the HOA president, it is my duty to ensure the safety of this community. Your so-called farm has been using an unregulated water system, and I demand that it be shut down immediately before people get sick." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Absolutely," she turned to the officers. "I insist you check his water system, and I'll be pressing charges if he refuses to comply." The officers exchanged a look, clearly annoyed that they had been dragged out here for what looked like a neighborly dispute. Still, they had a job to do. "Sir, we need to see your well and any water filtration systems you're using." Now, I could have just complied right then and there. I could have let them see that everything was perfectly legal, that my permits were in order, and that Karen was once again wasting everyone's time. But where's the fun in that? So instead, I played along. I sighed dramatically. "Wow, Karen, this is serious. If you're right, this could be an amazing issue." Karen's smirk widened. "Exactly. I knew you were breaking the law." One of the officers pulled out a notepad. "Do you have any documentation for your water system?" I scratched my chin, pretending to think. "You know, I might, but it's a bit complicated." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. If you were operating legally, you'd have the permits ready to go. I knew you were cutting corners." The officers looked less convinced. "Sir, do you have the paperwork or not?" "Oh, I do." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet, flipping it open to reveal my state-issued water inspector badge. The silence was delicious. Karen's smug expression didn't just drop, it plummeted. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The officers stared at my badge, then back at me, their entire demeanor shifting. "Wait," one of them muttered. "You're a state water inspector?" "Yep." I flipped the badge over for good measure. "Been one for about 10 years. Funny thing, illegal water operations? That's my job to investigate." Karen's face turned ghostly white. The mustached officer gave a low whistle. "Well, that's something." Karen, now visibly panicking, tried to backpedal. I was just trying to protect the community. I didn't know he was." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "You know what, Karen? You're absolutely right. We should do an inspection. And since I'm here, why don't we start with your water system?" The color drained from her face. What?" I turned to the officers. "I mean, She's making some pretty serious claims about water safety. If she's that concerned, we should definitely make sure the HOA's own water system is up to code. Just in case." The mustached officer caught on immediately. "That's actually a great idea." He turned to Karen. "You don't mind, do you?" Karen looked like she wanted to scream, but she was trapped. She had practically demanded an official inspection. Of course, she couldn't refuse now. I crossed my arms, watching as she struggled to come up with an excuse. "Something wrong, Karen?" For the first time ever, Karen had no words. And that's when I knew this was about to get really interesting. The officers exchanged glances, clearly amused by how quickly the tables had turned. Karen, however, wasn't laughing. She stood there blinking rapidly, her face shifting from pale to beet red. For once in her power-hungry reign over the neighborhood, she was completely at a loss for words. I decided to twist the knife just a little more. "Well, since I'm already here, let's make sure everything is up to code," I said, flashing a friendly yet pointed smile. "You were so concerned about my water system, Karen. I'm sure you wouldn't mind a thorough inspection of yours, right?" Karen swallowed hard. That's not necessary. The HOA follows all local regulations. There's no need for any." One of the officers cut her off. "Ma'am, you were the one who insisted on a full investigation. If there's an issue with illegal water usage, it affects the entire community, not just one property." Karen clenched her fists. And I added, savoring the moment, "as a state water inspector, I'm legally obligated to investigate any reports of water safety concerns, especially if they come from a community authority like an HOA president." The two officers nodded in agreement, and I could practically hear Karen's internal screams. "Fine," she snapped, "but you're not going to find anything. The HOA's water system is completely legal." "Great," I said, stretching my arms. "Then this shouldn't take long at all." One of the officers radioed in for a city records check on the HOA water permits while I took a slow, measured look around. The neighborhood was pristine, too pristine. Perfectly manicured lawns, flower beds arranged with surgical precision, and houses that all looked exactly the same. But beneath that well-manicured exterior, I had a gut feeling something was very, very wrong. I turned to one of the officers. "Mind if we check the HOA's irrigation system first?" "Not at all," he replied, clearly enjoying watching Karen squirm. Karen crossed her arms tightly over her chest as we walked toward the HOA's main water connection point. I could feel the tension radiating off of her. The other HOA members, who had previously backed her up like a cult following, were now suspiciously silent. They probably weren't expecting Karen's attempt to ruin me to backfire quite this spectacularly. We reached the water meter station, and I crouched down to take a closer look. Right away, I spotted something interesting. "Hey, officer," I said, gesturing toward the piping. "Notice anything weird about this setup?" The mustached officer knelt beside me, studying the system. His eyebrows lifted. "That's not normal." Karen let out a nervous chuckle. "I don't know what you're talking about." I tapped one of the pipes. "This system looks illegally connected to the municipal water line. The HOA isn't even supposed to be using city water for irrigation. It should have its own dedicated source." One of the other officers pulled out a notepad. "That true, ma'am." Karen's mouth opened and closed. I don't handle the technical details," she stammered. "We have a maintenance guy who takes care of that." "Then you won't mind us having a chat with him, will you?" I asked innocently. She didn't respond. Meanwhile, the radio crackled, and the officer who had called in the records check got an update. He frowned at what he heard. That's interesting. According to the city records, the HOA never applied for permission to modify the water system." Karen stiffened. That must be a mistake." I stood up, dusting off my hands. "Oh, I really don't think it is." The officer looked at me. "You think they're stealing water?" "That's exactly what they're doing," I confirmed. "This system is siphoning city water illegally. They're basically making the homeowners foot the bill for it, while the HOA pockets the difference." Karen's minions, who had up until now been silent, suddenly started whispering amongst themselves. One of them, a middle-aged guy with an expensive haircut and a deeply concerned expression, turned toward Karen. "Is this true? We've all been paying ridiculous HOA fees for years. You told us the costs were going toward community maintenance." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "It's complicated. We needed the extra funds for neighborhood beautification projects. You want property values to stay high, don't you?" I let out a laugh. "So you've been illegally siphoning city water, overcharging residents, and lying about it? Wow. Karen, I got to say, you've got guts." The mustached officer stood up and clicked his notepad shut. Ma'am, we're going to need to file an official report on this. Karen's face darkened. You can't just. And, I added, grinning, since this is a pretty serious water code violation, I'll need to escalate this to the State Department for further investigation. Her eyes went wild. You can't do that. Oh, I absolutely can. A murmur ran through the group of HOA members. This was no longer just about a grudge against me. This was about where all their money had been going. And from the looks on their faces, they weren't happy. One of the older homeowners, a frail but sharp-looking woman, narrowed her eyes at Karen. Are you saying the HOA has been committing fraud? Karen's panic reached new heights. No, of course not. We were just. The mustached officer took a step forward. Ma'am, I need you to remain calm. If there's an issue with the HOA's financial records, we have to bring in auditors. Auditors? Karen screeched. Yep, I said. And if you've been charging residents for water you didn't have the right to charge them for, well, that's grand-scale fraud. You might want to get a lawyer. The realization hit her like a truck. She had walked into this thinking she could destroy me. Instead, she had just set herself on fire. The best part? This wasn't even the biggest violation I was about to uncover. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that people like Karen didn't just bend the rules once. They made a lifestyle out of it. And I was about to find all her dirty little secrets. The scene had turned into something straight out of a courtroom drama. Karen, once the smug queen of the HOA, now looked like she was standing trial, her face drained of all color. The officers weren't just taking notes anymore. They were investigating. And I wasn't done yet. I glanced at the stunned crowd of HOA members. Some were whispering furiously. Others stood in a daze, as if just realizing they had been scammed for years. A few, however, looked outright angry, and rightfully so. They had been paying for water usage that Karen had no right to charge them for. Karen, still in shock, tried to salvage the situation. This is ridiculous. You're making baseless accusations, and I won't stand for it. I smirked. Oh, Karen, you should sit for this one, actually. I turned to the mustached officer. You mind if we check the HOA's billing records for water usage? I have a feeling these homeowners are going to want to know where their money's been going. One of the older residents, the frail but sharp-looking woman named Mrs. Henderson, piped up. Actually, yes. I want to see those records right now. Karen's head snapped toward her. Oh, don't be ridiculous, Margaret. The HOA's finances are private business matters. Mrs. Henderson squared her shoulders. Not when they're funded by our money. A chorus of agreement spread through the crowd. Karen was losing control. The mustached officer nodded. I think that's fair. If the HOA has nothing to hide, then an audit shouldn't be an issue. Karen's composure cracked. An audit? She laughed, but it sounded desperate. That's absurd. You can't just demand an audit because some farmer decides to play detective. I shrugged. Actually, I can. Because, see, I'm not just a farmer. I'm a state inspector with full authority to investigate municipal and private water management violations. And since you called the cops on me, this is now a state investigation. That was the Uno reverse moment. Karen's expression twisted into pure horror. The crowd gasped. Someone even muttered, "Oh, she's so screwed." The mustached officer didn't hide his grin. Well, ma'am, he's got a point. You started this. Karen's jaw worked furiously, but no words came out. I crossed my arms. So, let's take a little walk, shall we? I'd like to see the HOA's official water permits, billing records, and maintenance reports. You know, all those legal documents you definitely have, right? Silence. A long, heavy, glorious silence. Karen stood frozen, her mind racing for an escape. She looked at the HOA members, her former supporters, but they were done with her. Then, like magic, Karen switched tactics. She puffed up her chest, forcing an exasperated sigh. Fine. You want to see the documents? Fine. Let's go to the HOA office. But when you see that everything is in order, I expect a full apology. I bit back a laugh. The sheer delusion. One of the officers gestured for her to lead the way, and the group followed like a parade of Karen's downfall. As we walked, one of the HOA members, a younger guy in his 30s, leaned toward me. Dude, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen. I grinned. Stick around. We're just getting started. The HOA's office was a small, pristine building near the community clubhouse, decorated with fake plants and way too many framed inspirational quotes. Karen stormed inside and yanked open a file cabinet, pulling out a stack of carefully organized papers. Here, she snapped, slamming them onto the desk. All official. All legal. The mustached officer picked up the first document. All right, let's see. I leaned over, scanning the pages, and within seconds, I found the first red flag. Oh, I murmured, smirking. Karen, you're really bad at covering your tracks. She stiffened. Excuse me. I tapped the page. These billing records? They don't match the city's official records at all. The officer flipped to another sheet, his brow furrowed. He's right. The HOA reported using half the amount of water that the city actually built them for. I feigned surprise. Oh wow. So where did the other half go? Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut. She knew. The officer turned to her, suspicion growing. Ma'am, can you explain this discrepancy? Karen forced a fake laugh. There must be a clerical error. I leaned against the desk. Sure. But let's check the financial statements. You know, see if that error magically turned into extra HOA fees. Karen's eyes darted to the locked cabinet in the corner. Bingo. The officer followed my gaze. Ma'am, do you have the key to that cabinet? Karen hesitated. I don't know where it is. Mrs. Henderson snorted. It's in your purse, Karen. We all saw you lock it last week. Karen's eye twitched. The mustached officer sighed. Ma'am, hand over the key. Her fingers tightened around her purse. This is outrageous. You can't just. Karen, I interrupted, grinning ear to ear. If you don't open that cabinet, I'll just have the city subpoena the records. And trust me, you do not want that. A deadly silence filled the room. Karen was cornered. Her hand trembled as she pulled out the key and unlocked the cabinet. The moment the officer pulled out the real financial records, it was over. Skimming the papers, I let out a low whistle. Well, would you look at that? Multiple fake invoices, money being funneled into a maintenance fund that didn't exist, and thousands of dollars unaccounted for. I turned to the HOA members. So, just to be clear, you guys have been paying for a water system that was never supposed to be on city lines, and Karen here has been charging you extra and pocketing the difference. The outrage was instant. She stole from us. This is embezzlement. I want a full refund. Karen's composure shattered. I didn't. I was just. The mustached officer turned to her, stone-faced. Ma'am, at this time, we're going to have to take you in for questioning regarding financial fraud and misuse of community funds. Karen screeched. You can't do this to me. I shrugged. Actually, we can. As the officers cuffed her, she thrashed. This isn't over. You ruined everything. I grinned, tipping an imaginary hat. No, Karen, you did that yourself. And just like that, the queen of the HOA was dethroned. Karen's shriek could have shattered glass. She writhed in the officer's grip, sputtering every excuse imaginable. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. The mustached officer sighed. Ma'am, that's not a government position. Karen thrashed harder. This is a misunderstanding. I was only doing what's best for the community. One of the HOA members, a balding man with an expensive watch, laughed bitterly. Karen, you weren't helping us. You were robbing us. I folded my arms, watching as the neighborhood's illusion of perfection came crashing down. Homeowners huddled in groups, whispering furiously. The realization was sinking in. They had been conned. But this was bigger than just Karen. Because if there's one thing I knew, it's that corruption never works alone. And from the way some HOA board members were suddenly looking very uncomfortable, I had a feeling Karen wasn't the only one guilty. The mustached officer flipped through the financial records. You realize this isn't just fraud, right? He held up one of the more creative invoices Karen had faked, charging residents for community upkeep while diverting funds. That's embezzlement. Karen's face paled. I didn't mean to steal. I was just redirecting resources. A woman in the crowd, her arms crossed tightly, scoffed. So why did your resource redirection include a $10,000 spa renovation at your house? Karen's jaw clenched. In a new car? More murmurs spread. I smirked. Oh, this just keeps getting better. But then the real bombshell hit. One of the officers pulled out a different file from the cabinet, one Karen hadn't expected anyone to find. His eyebrows shot up. Oh wow. The other officer leaned over, read the paper, then whistled. Well, Karen, you might want to call a lawyer. Several lawyers, actually. Karen froze. What is that? The officer flipped the folder around for the crowd to see. HOA property seizure notices. The crowd gasped. Karen's face turned to stone. I took a step forward. Wait, are you telling me she wasn't just overcharging residents? She was actually trying to steal their homes? Dead silence. Then chaos. Homeowners exploded into rage. What? She tried to foreclose on people? For what? I knew those fines were fake. Karen, you absolute monster. Karen took a shaky step back. No, no, no. Those were necessary measures. The officer shook his head. No, ma'am. This is straight-up predatory foreclosure. Turns out, Karen had been fabricating HOA violations, slapping homeowners with insane fines, and then using unpaid balances to threaten foreclosure. If they couldn't pay, the HOA took their houses. And guess whose signature was on every fraudulent claim? Karen's. I leaned toward her, grinning. Karen, you ever hear the phrase, "You should have quit while you were ahead"? Her mask shattered. She wasn't smug anymore. She wasn't arrogant. She was terrified. The HOA board members, previously quiet, suddenly turned on her. A man in a suit, one of Karen's former allies, snarled. Karen, what the hell did you get us into? Karen whirled on him. Oh, don't act innocent, Robert. You knew. Robert recoiled. Excuse me? I signed off on basic maintenance fees. I didn't know you were trying to steal people's houses. Another board member, a younger woman in business casual, stepped forward, looking shaken. You told us everything was legal. You said we were just enforcing HOA rules. Karen panicked. Aye. Robert turned to the officers. I had nothing to do with this. I want no part of it. I couldn't help but chuckle. The rats were jumping ship. The mustached officer shook his head. We'll be looking into all of you. If you were involved in this, there will be consequences. Karen snapped. I did this for all of you, she shrieked. You're all ungrateful. I kept this neighborhood perfect. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, Karen. You kept it so perfect that you nearly stole people's homes. She turned to the crowd, desperate. Don't you see? Without me, this place will fall apart. Property values will plummet. A middle-aged man crossed his arms. Karen, I'd rather live in a low-value neighborhood than one run by a thief. The crowd erupted in agreement. The mustached officer sighed. All right, we're done here. He turned to Karen. Ma'am, you're under arrest for fraud, financial mismanagement, and illegal property seizure. Karen's body went rigid. The officer pulled out his cuffs. Turn around. Karen screamed, No, you can't. I'm the HOA president. Click. The cuffs locked around her wrists. And that was it. The reign of Queen Karen was officially over. The crowd cheered. Homeowners clapped. Some even hugged each other. I spotted Mrs. Henderson wiping a single tear from her eye. We're finally free. I turned to the HOA board. So what happens now? Robert cleared his throat. Well, considering our HOA president is now in police custody, I think we should dissolve the HOA. The cheers grew louder. I gave a dramatic gasp. Oh no, but what about the property values? The laughter that followed was glorious. The mustached officer turned to me, smirking. Well, Inspector, I'd say you did a damn good job today. I tipped an imaginary hat, just doing my part for neighborhood beautification. As Karen was dragged into the police car, her shrieks fading into the night, the residents of the community finally felt something they hadn't in years: freedom. And I? Well, I had one hell of a story to tell. The moment Karen was stuffed into the back of the police car, reality finally seemed to hit her. Her eyes darted around, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But there was no one left. The very people she had spent years bullying, fining, and scamming now stood watching with folded arms and satisfied smirks. It was poetic. The doors slammed shut, and with the flick of sirens, the car pulled away. A long silence followed, as if the whole neighborhood was still processing what had just happened. Then Mrs. Henderson, the frail but feisty old woman, let out a slow clap. The entire crowd exploded into cheers. Someone even popped open a can of soda, like it was a championship celebration. She's gone, a woman yelled, practically dancing on the sidewalk. One of the men in the crowd shook his head. I knew she was shady, but this? Trying to steal our houses. Another homeowner, a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard, groaned. Damn, I just paid my 4th mandatory landscaping fee last month. Where did all that money even go? I chuckled. Well, if you check her credit card statements, I'm guessing you'll find charges for spa treatments, designer handbags, and some seriously overpriced wine. The HOA board members, at least the ones not currently looking like they were about to pass out from sheer panic, stood awkwardly to the side. The once powerful, untouchable Karen had fallen, and now they were scrambling to figure out their next move. Robert, the former vice president, cleared his throat. So about the HOA. We should, probably do something. Mrs. Henderson snorted. Yeah, we should burn it to the ground. The crowd roared in agreement. I smirked. You guys thinking what I'm thinking? The homeowners cheered. HOA dissolution time. The great HOA purge begins. The first order of business was going through the records. With Karen gone, the board members, desperate to save their own skins, handed over every single file, invoice, and document she had locked away. And oh, it was glorious. Fake fines, tons of them, all issued under Karen's direct orders. Bogus repair fees. HOA members had been paying double for maintenance that was never even done. Personal transactions. Karen had literally used HOA money to fund her vacations. Evidence of intimidation. She had threatened homeowners with legal action when they tried to challenge her fees. By the time we were halfway through the files, the mood shifted from victorious to absolutely livid. She stole from us. She's been running this like a freaking mafia. No wonder she fought so hard to stay in power. Robert, now realizing just how deep Karen's corruption ran, turned to me. So, what do we do now? I grinned. We end this scam once and for all. The HOA goes down in flames. Metaphorically, mostly. The next few days were beautifully chaotic. First, the homeowners gathered in the community center to hold a vote on dissolving the HOA. The results? Unanimous. Then they did something even better. They reported everything to the State Fraud Division. Turns out, stealing HOA funds is a big freaking deal. Within a week, a full-scale financial investigation was launched, targeting Karen and her inner circle. Even better, the local news got wind of the scandal. One afternoon, I was fixing a fence on my farm when I heard a familiar, sweet sound. The HOA's downfall being broadcasted on live TV. The anchor's voice was serious. Breaking news. The former president of the Willow Creek HOA, Karen Whitmore, has been arrested on multiple charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and illegal property seizures. Investigators believe she may have stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from unsuspecting homeowners. The screen cut to a photo of Karen, her infamous resting Karen face now replaced with a horrified mugshot. I grinned. Perfect. The best part? Homeowners were getting their money back. Since Karen had stolen through fake fines and illegal foreclosures, the courts forced her to sell her house, car, and every luxury item she had bought with HOA funds. Homeowners who had been scammed started receiving compensation checks in the mail. And let me tell you, watching Karen's own house go up for sale was poetic justice at its finest. One final, petty victory. Even though Karen was officially out of the picture, there was one last thing I wanted to do. A few weeks after the HOA dissolved, I noticed something interesting. A new sign at the entrance of the neighborhood. Now a free community. No HOA. I couldn't help myself. I grabbed a ladder, climbed up, and added a small yet important edit to the bottom of the sign. Thanks to Mike, your local farmer and state water inspector. A little over the top? Maybe. But after everything Karen put me through, totally worth it. As I climbed down, Mrs. Henderson walked by, saw the sign, and started laughing hysterically. "You're my favorite person, Mike," she wheezed. I gave her a dramatic bow. "At your service." And with that, I finally, officially put the Karen saga behind me. The HOA was dead, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive. Gone were the dreaded HOA fines, the fake violation notices, and Karen's power-hungry reign of terror. Homeowners now had the freedom to paint their houses whatever color they wanted, park their cars in their own driveways without fear, and best of all, not have to pay a single dime to a corrupt HOA ever again. The air even felt fresher, or maybe that was just the smell of victory. Where's everyone now? With Karen locked away and the HOA officially dismantled, the neighborhood started rebuilding. Karen? Well, let's just say her future wasn't looking too bright. After pleading guilty to fraud, embezzlement, and financial mismanagement, she got hit with a 6-year prison sentence and a fat restitution bill. Even better, the homeowners sued her for damages and won. She lost everything. Her once pristine McMansion sold at an auction, her luxury car repossessed, her entire reputation obliterated. No one ever heard from her again. But word on the street was that she ended up working as a cashier at a hardware store under a completely different name. The HOA board members? Most of them claimed ignorance to save themselves, but some got fined heavily for their role in the financial disaster. Robert, the former vice president, tried to play innocent, but once the fraud investigation expanded, they found enough dirt on him to ban him from ever holding a financial position again. Oops. The homeowners? The neighborhood thrived after the HOA was gone. Houses that had been stuck on the market for years suddenly sold. Residents celebrated by throwing a massive block party, one that Karen would have never allowed. Even better, HOA refunds started rolling in. People who had been fined for fake violations got reimbursed. Some even got enough money back to remodel their houses. And me? Life after HOA drama. With Karen out of the picture, life on my farm went back to normal. No more mystery fines, no more HOA spies snooping around, and definitely no more police visits. I kept doing what I did best, farming and, of course, water inspections. Every now and then, I'd get a visit from one of the former HOA victims. Mrs. Henderson stopped by to drop off homemade cookies as a thank you. The salt and pepper guy came over just to say, "Dude, you are a legend." Even Robert, now fully humbled, swung by one day and muttered, "Yeah, sorry about all that." I just smiled and said, "Hey, man, you're just lucky I don't charge for inspections." The final twist. HOA tries to make a comeback. Just when I thought it was all over, something hilarious happened. One afternoon, I got a mysterious letter in the mail. I opened it, skimmed it, and then burst out laughing. It was from a newly formed HOA group trying to re-establish order in the community. They were asking me to attend their meeting and consider joining the HOA board. I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. Instead of responding, I grabbed a marker and wrote in big, bold letters across the invitation, "No thanks. I like my water clean." I mailed it back. So what did we learn today? 1. Never mess with a farmer. 2. Never mess with a water inspector. 3. And definitely never, ever mess with both at the same time. But now I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to deal with a power-hungry HOA? What's the craziest thing you've seen an HOA do? How would you have handled Karen? Drop your wildest HOA stories. Until next time, stay free, stay smart, and remember, check your water lines. You never know who's stealing.